Thank you to everyone here for being a part of this live event and to those viewing the recording. I'm so happy to see so many new and familiar faces joining. Our community is ever growing, and I'm so grateful to all the support you're showing time and time again. As always, I got to give a shout out to my amazing parents, Eddie and Lori, who are the best human beings I know. They're always there for me and always here for these events. Thank you to all of the survivors, especially Evelyne Appel, who will be sharing her testimony with us today. And welcome to Sundays with Survivors, a program that brings Holocaust survivors and their testimonies to people all over the world. My name is Michael Mantell. I'm a psychotherapist, educator, and 3G, a grandchild of Holocaust survivors. With the rise of Jew hatred, I found myself feeling trapped in conversations, arguing with people who consciously or unconsciously hate Jews. One example was when sharing resources during Holocaust Remembrance Day with a group of mental health professionals and students. The conversation quickly devolved into attacks on Jews, including the accusation that Jews use the Holocaust narrative to oppress and kill others. It sparked an idea in me to produce and host Holocaust education program and to do more work that promotes Jewish pride and combats Jew hatred. And with that, I started the first Sundays with Survivors program in October 2020. It began as a one-time private event for friends and family to honor my grandparents' memory and to combat Jew hatred. Thank God it became so successful that we continued to add more events and opened it up to the public. In 2021, following the success of this great program, I added 2G Tuesdays, which features children of Holocaust survivors. These programs that features dozens of Holocaust survivors and their family members have reached thousands of people all over the world and raised so far over $30,000 to support Holocaust education. I'm so grateful that we've been going over 3 years strong and counting. And in June of this year, 2024, I'm excited that we'll be featuring the first 3G Thursdays, which will spotlight grandchildren of Holocaust survivors. Since starting these programs, I've been fortunate enough to contribute to other programs as well that promote Holocaust education and combat Jew hatred. I was featured on TV news segment, co-wrote and contributed to articles, and appeared on panels about Holocaust education and combating Jew hatred in general and on college campuses. I created fundraising programs that engage communities and promote Jewish pride, initiated a support group for Jewish therapists, started a chapter for alum to combat anti-Semitism and Jew hatred at my college alma mater, and was part of an initiative to bring Title VI complaint against my alma mater, which is now in an open investigation. Most importantly, I've made connections with survivors, their families, and this incredible community. My grandfather, Mickey Mandelovich, passed away before I was born, and my grandmother, Alice Diamond, in 2008. Yet these programs and the connections I've made with all of you help me connect with them, remember them, and make sure that their lives and the lives of all survivors and their families are never forgotten. Today, we are fortunate enough to be joined by Evelyne Appel. I met her at a wonderful 3G NY program. We spoke, and I instantly felt a connection with this beautiful person, and I'm sure you will all fall in love with her too. In this program, Evelyne will share the story of how her childhood ended abruptly in 1940 when the Nazis invaded France. She will take us on the journey of when her family fled Paris to a small village in central France, then to Lyon in southern France, before going to Italian-occupied Grenoble, and finally being sent into hiding in a Catholic boarding school. Later, during an attempt to cross to Switzerland for safety, a group of Jewish children, including Evelyne, were taken into custody by the French police. And with the help of some kind-hearted people, Evelyne and the other children made it over the Swiss border. There, however, she was arrested, placed in quarantine camps, and between homes and convents before being reunited with her family after over a year apart. Following the presentation, if there is time, we will show a 10-minute clip of a reenactment of Evelyne's childhood during the war in the SAR High School's performance of Witness Theater. Then we will open the program for Q&A. As I always say, no matter how incredible these programs are, and they truly are amazing, the Q&A portion makes it even more meaningful. It's a time for all of us to interact, ask questions, and share our own experiences. During that time, please feel free to raise your virtual hand using the raise hand emoji. Type your questions or comments in the chat box for me to share for you, or simply unmute yourself to speak. And just one announcement before we begin. Please see the date for the next 2G Tuesdays program featuring Doron Keren and his mother, Holocaust survivor, Christina Heger, whose Holocaust testimony was the subject of the book, The Girl in the Green Sweater, and the 2011 movie In Darkness. That program is scheduled for Tuesday, April 9th at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. And with all of that, I thank you all and welcome Evelyne.
Thank you for asking me to participate in Sundays with Survivors. My name is Evelyne Appel. I am a little child from France, a very fortunate one, a walking miracle, as all survivors are. My parents, my older sister Rachel, and I survived the war. My parents were born in Warsaw, Poland, lived in very religious homes, but my father, who lived in poverty, started to work at age 11 or 12, and at 18 became secular. He joined the Jewish Socialist Party called the Bund and fought for the rest of his life for better conditions for workers. After the war in 1921, he went to Belgium, where he met my mother. They married in Brussels in 1922, and Rachel was born a year later. In 1926, they moved to Paris, where they joined the Bund, and Rachel went to Yiddish school. My father also joined the French Socialist Party, and with political connections, was able to obtain French citizenship for his family. Being born in Paris in 1932, I was naturalized at birth. In France, before the war, Jews from Poland did not become French citizens. In 1937, Rachel, a teenager, was learning English in school and had a pen pal from London called Mary Walker. Mary came to Paris with her class for the Easter holidays, and my mother invited her for the goûter, the 4 o'clock snack. It was Passover at the same time, so my mother made boubeles, made with matzah meal and other good stuff. Mary comes, we sit around the table, Mama puts a boubele on each plate, the English girl takes a bite of the boubele and says, "Oh, French pastry is so delicious." And then came 1940. The German army invaded Poland in September 1939, Holland and Belgium in May 1940, and then started to march through France. Panic. My father said, "Where the Germans are, I do not want to be." So on June 11, 1940, 3 days before they marched through Paris, we fled to a small village in the Massif Central in the center of France. My parents rented a small room above a watchmaker's shop. And the next morning, my father goes to the mirror and says, "I'm all gray." He became gray overnight. He had beautiful black hair the day before. A week later, the town crier ran around beating his drum and called everyone to the village square, where the mayor announced in tears that France had signed an armistice with Germany. Our country had lost the war. I asked my father, "What does armistice mean?" He explained to me that it was the end of the war, but that we Jews were in danger because of a very bad man called Hitler. France was divided in two parts, the occupied zone from the north to the center of France, Paris included, and the rest of the country became the free zone, ruled by the Vichy government. We were very lucky to be in the free zone area, so we went to Lyon, the second largest city in France. My father had to work. He made beautiful handbags. He was a craftsman, an artisan. In Lyon, my parents and other Bundistes joined a resistance network. Being French citizens, my family were at an advantage, and they used that advantage to help other Jews. My father made a pocketbook with a false bottom and stored false identity papers inside. My sister Rachel was their courier, and as part of her position in the network, she would travel by bus or train and deliver false papers to Jews in hiding. She would help families to memorize their new identity, speak to them in Yiddish if they did not speak French, and sometimes travel with them to the Spanish or Swiss border. We had people living in our apartment from time to time. A couple from Belgium stayed with us almost 6 months. They never went out. My mother risked her life to provide food for everyone. She was Mother Courage. My father worked in the apartment we lived in and would employ fellow Bundis. It was very hard for people on the run or in hiding to make money to live. In November 1942, the American army landed in North Africa, and the Germans came to Lyon. We lost our naturalization and became foreign Jews, so we fled to Grenoble in the Alps, which was occupied by the Italian army. In Grenoble, like in Lyon, my father worked in the apartment we rented. Rachel went to work in an office, and I went to school. The resistance became more intense, and life became more dangerous. A few months after our arrival, the Germans occupied Grenoble, and we were trapped. In the middle of the night, we were awakened by loud knocking on the door, endless ringing of the bell. The French police were looking for Italian deserters, as we lived in an Italian neighborhood. Of course, we did not know that. We thought they were looking for Jews. My father decided not to open the door. The police was ready to force the door down, but luckily, our neighbors told them there are old people living there who are never home. I was shaking for the rest of the night. Our neighbors saved our lives, but we were no longer safe. I was sent to a Catholic boarding school in the mountains, went to Mass, skied, and pretended to be happy. But when Jewish children were taken by the Gestapo from a nearby convent, my parents decided to send me to Switzerland. A group of parents, most of them Bundis, hired a passeur, a smuggler, and I joined a group of 10 children and took the train to Annemasse, a French-Swiss border town. Along with us were a married couple. The wife was very pregnant, and she began having labor pains in a train. On our arrival to the town, the smuggler told us to wait for him at the train station, and he took the couple to a hotel. He came back and took us to a field behind bushes, telling us to lie still and wait for his return. It was very cold, and in front of us was a road with German tanks passing by. The oldest among us had a thermos with hot coffee, and he crawled from child to child, giving us a sip. I will never forget him. Meanwhile, at the hotel, the smuggler had been arrested and gave away our location to the French police, who took us into custody. The officer at the station was given carte blanche to do with us as he pleased. Instead of delivering us to the Germans, they took us to a boarding school at the Swiss border. From there, the lady principal and her assistant risked their lives by sneaking us to the French-Swiss border. And we climbed a barbed wire fence to safety. Because I climbed that barbed wire fence, I have grandchildren today. In Switzerland, we were arrested by the authorities as we were illegal aliens. We were taken to an internment camp near Geneva called Le Camp du Bout du Monde, the camp of the end of the world. We were not treated well, slept on wooden floors, and were not well fed. I was hungry all the time, but they saved our lives. I then was bounced around to a couple of foster homes. I was very unhappy and very worried about my parents and my sister. During the war, names as Rachel, Sarah, David, or Salomon were death sentences. So Rachel became Raymond, officially and to all her friends. The American Army liberated Grenoble on my birthday, August 22, 1944. And on that day, a friend of our family came to the street where they lived, and in front of the window, shouted with all her strength, Rachel! They were free. In March 1945, I came back to Grenoble and was reunited with my family. Somehow, they had survived. We went back to Paris in April and joined the Bund. My parents with the adults, Rachel with the youth group, and I with the children's group, the SCIF. In 1945, there were many Jewish orphans in France. So the Bund opened 2 orphanages, and we, the children from the SCIF, would give shows in Yiddish and perform in Paris, London, and Amsterdam. The proceeds would go to the orphanages. The Workmen's Circle in New York helped a lot to finance the expenses. What I saw during my childhood were human beings helping one another, Jews helping other Jews. Rachel became a war bride. She married an American soldier and came to New York in 1946. My parents and I joined her 3 years later. I married in 1954, and I am blessed with 2 beautiful daughters, Nadine and Denise, and 3 grandchildren, Matthew, David, and Michelle, who are all very successful in their respective fields. I worked for a French bank and retired in 1999, soon after my husband passed away. I then traveled all over the world, indulging in my hobby, photography. I lost my childhood when I moved on, and it has been a great journey. I am very grateful to my grandson Matthew Holtz for joining your program, and I want to honor my parents and my sister Rasha's memory for their bravery and generosity during the worst of times. To all walking miracles out there, we're still here. Thank you very much.
Amen. Thank you so much, Evelyne. To hear it directly from you is so important. We don't normally have something else to share, but the video of the Witness Theater performance is absolutely incredible. And you harness so much emotion, which I'm sure you didn't have to act much because you experienced it. But your stage presence, it's just so warm and welcoming. And for those who don't know, Witness Theater is a program that brings together high school students and Holocaust survivors. They do this program together, they meet weekly, and then in the end, they put together a production. The one that Evelyne was part of was in 2015 with SAR high school students. It's a 10-minute clip, so I'll be sharing that right now. And I want you to think about questions, comments that you'd like to share, because after we share the video, we'll have time for Q&A portion.
I was born in Paris, France, in 1932. I lived with my mother, my father, and my older sister, Rachel. I have wonderful memories of singing with my family, going to the movies, receiving candy from my father every Friday, and eating my mother's delicious bourbon. But my childhood ended in 1940 when the Germans invaded France. My family fled Paris for a small village in central France. It was clear then that everything had changed.
Papa, you look so different.
I know, Evelyne. My hair turned gray overnight. I've never seen anything like it.
How did that happen?
From stress, Evelyne. From being worried and sad.
But why are you sad? There's an armistice. Doesn't that mean the war is ending?
Yes, but our war is just beginning. There's a very bad man in charge now, named Adolf Hitler. He doesn't like the Jews, and it's going to be very bad for us all.
I felt like I had aged along with my father. My childhood now, a thing of the past. My family fled to Lyon in southern France. It was governed by the French state, so it was safer than the Nazi-occupied areas. My father was able to find work making pocketbooks. Being French citizens, my family and I were at an advantage, and we used our advantage to help other Jews. My father made a pocketbook with a false bottom and stored false identification papers inside. My sister Rachel was part of the Jewish French resistance, and as part of her position in the network, she delivered false papers to Jews in hiding.
Rachel, here is the delivery for today.
All right, I'll be back before dinner.
Don't forget our code. Ring the bell twice for friends and family, once for a stranger.
I know, Papa. I haven't forgotten.
Be careful, Rochelle.
Every time the doorbell rang, we jumped. In 1942, the Germans came to Lyon, and my family fled again, this time to the Italian-occupied Grenoble in the French Alps. The Italian army mostly left us alone. But in 1943, when I was 11, the police pounded on our door in the middle of the night.
this one ring. This could be trouble.
Who's
Quiet,
at the door?
everyone. Quiet.
Shh, keep your voice down.
Police, open up.
Oh no, it's the police.
Abram, which way do you think they'll know we're in here?
We know you're in there. Open up.
My mom's scared.
Shh, Evelyne, it's okay. It's okay.
It's dark in the house. Let's just stay quiet and maybe they'll think we're not home.
We're coming in.
Excuse me, officer?
Yes.
I live next door. If you're looking for the family that lives here, they're not home.
Okay. I guess we won't break down the door this time. Let's try another house.
I saw the terror in my parents' eyes that night. The realization that they could not protect me shook me to my core. I wish I could comfort you and tell you that everything will be all right. I was so petrified that my teeth chattered all night. Our neighbors saved our lives, but we were no longer safe. My parents sent me to hide in a Catholic boarding school where I went to Mass, skied, and pretended to be happy. But when Jewish children were taken from a nearby convent, my parents hired a passeur to smuggle me into Switzerland. I was with a group of 10 children and a married couple. The wife was pregnant, and when she began having labor pains, the smuggler took the couple to a hotel. He left us children alone in a field behind some bushes, telling us to lie still until his return.
How long do you think we've been here?
I don't know. At least a few hours.
I'm freezing. I can't even feel my hands.
Here, have something hot to drink.
Quick, get down! I see German tanks passing by.
Are you cold too? Here, have some.
He crawled from child to child, sharing his hot drink. I did not know him, but in that moment, that boy was my hero. I'm still amazed at his courage and his kindness.
Thank you. Someone's coming!
Our pastor had been arrested and gave away our location to the French police, who took us into custody. The officer at the station was given carte blanche to do with us as he pleased. Instead of delivering us to the Gestapo, the police took us to a boarding school at the Swiss border. From there, the female principal and her assistant risked their lives, sneaking us to the border. And we climbed the barbed wire fence to safety in Switzerland. So to me, carte blanche means that I have grandchildren. In Switzerland, I was arrested and taken to a quarantine camp where I lived in terrible conditions for 2 months. I was then bounced around between foster homes and convents. On my birthday, August 22, 1944, my sister and my parents were liberated in Grenoble. In March of 1945, at 12 years old, the Red Cross put me on a train to Grenoble. I arrived safely, and on my way home from the station, I spotted Rochelle in a grocery store. She was on a date.
Rochelle? Rochelle! Rochelle!
Evelyne!
Rochelle! I missed you! I thought I'd never see you again. How are you?
Are you okay?
Yes.
Hey, come on, you're making too much noise. Get out of my store. Come on.
Oh, Evelyne.
I ruined my sister's date, but I doubt she minded. I was home, and we were together again, although forever changed. I was robbed of my childhood, but the war was over now. It was up to me to reclaim my life.
Evelyne, thank you for sharing your testimony with us and for allowing me to share that program with everybody. At this point, we open it up for Q&A for everyone here to share any questions they have, any comments. Evelyne, I want to start by asking you a question, and then everyone else can also chime in if they'd like. But the question is, when did you start sharing your testimony, and how did you begin telling it to your family, your children, and your grandchildren?
I told my children they were young. I would tell them a little bit each time, and they got interested. But the first time I really made a testimony was Steven Spielberg interview. And I'm very thankful to him for what he did, because he paid for all these interviews, I think 52,000. And it was a good thing for all of us to do this. And I understand the interviews went to all the Holocaust museums.
Your family took a lot of risks. Your father, sister, and mother, part of the Jewish-French resistance, and also putting you in hiding and not sure where you're going, and giving you to a passer to smuggle you across the border. So can you speak more about your family's work within the French resistance, any specific stories that they shared with you, and also what was it like for them within that time frame that they weren't with you?
For them, it was the worst of time, because they were supposed to get, nobody had phones, of course, in France, but what they had arranged is that the passer was supposed to call at a cafe. So the parents got together in a cafe, and no caller claimed that the children were safe in Switzerland. So they understood something terrible had happened. And this was the worst of time for them, until they found out that I was in Switzerland. It took quite a few days. It was a nightmare for them.
And Kathy Winter asked, how did your parents remain safe? And then Rosa asks a great question. Are you still in touch with any of the other children who you spent that time with?
No, the children from that I went to Switzerland with, I hardly knew them. I think one I knew, but no, I never was in touch with them. But here we have a little French group of survivors that we started to meet at the Hidden Child Foundation. And as we are all tribal, we get the French, to speaking French together. And we formed a little group, and we've fought since 1996. And we get together all the time and celebrate our birthdays and talk about the Holocaust. But it's nice for us to be together. So we are very much together.
Beautiful. And then the second part, because I'm sorry, I asked the two questions together. How did your family remain safe during that time? They definitely put their lives at risk.
It was very difficult. I know Richard went to live with a Gentile family in Grenoble. My parents were in that little village where I had been in a boarding school in the mountains. But then they came back to Grenoble. It was just pure luck. Pure luck, because at the end, the Germans went into one street, grabbed people into the street, Jews into the street, shot them in the street. But in their street, they didn't go, and it was just pure luck.
So your sister was 10 years older than you, so she was a young adult at that time. You were much younger. What were you able to gather or understand from what was going on around you? Like, what was your understanding at the time?
Unfortunately, I understood too much because my parents never heard anything from me. I mean, I was like, not even 8 years old when my father told me about Hitler. So I knew we were in danger, and as I said, when the door would ring, then we would jump. I understood everything. I understood that my sister was involved with false papers. But the worst part, we were lucky to have a radio all the time, and we would listen to London. And in June 1943, we were outside of Grenoble with another Jewish family. And the correspondent at the BBC announced that 2 men had escaped from the camp. And then they started, and they made their way to, they were the only 2 men who escaped from Auschwitz, but they made their way to Switzerland. And they went to the BBC and started to describe the gas chambers. And I understood everything. And that was the worst of time.
And that's a very famous story that you just shared of these 2 men who escaped from Auschwitz trying to tell everyone the truth and whether people believe them or not. That's a fascinating.
It was June 1943.
Yeah.
That London announced it.
Yeah. I just want to share a few things. Yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
They had no illusion of what would happen to us if we got caught. And I was caught, but luckily only one night at the police station. And the next morning they saved us. They really saved us.
Wow. Just a few comments that people are making. Someone says, I'll never tire of hearing the stories from these amazing people and my amazing friends. So thank you, Evelyne, for this time.
I'm the luckiest one because we survived as a family.
Yeah. And another person shares that her father was also in Lyon at the same time. They escaped from France to North Africa. So her father is also a survivor from France. So thank you for sharing that. Another person asks, were your sister's experiences ever recorded, especially as an example of Jewish resistance?
Well, she did the Steve Spielberg interview and another interview also. She did a few, yes. Yes, it was.
And were your family ever acknowledged for the work they did, again, putting themselves at risk, helping other Jews escape?
No, not really, no. That's why it's important I say today.
Yeah, amen.
Yeah.
And there were people who helped you and your family, your neighbor, the school personnel. Were they ever recognized as righteous among the nation or any recognition for their work? Or have you ever met them?
Well, they have, I mean, just those neighbors, we didn't even know them because, at that time we don't get too funny with neighbors. So, but they saved us. We hardly knew them. And the lady and the young man who crossed us to Switzerland, I did not know them either. I didn't even know their name.
And what was your experience like alone without your family and hiding at the Catholic boarding school? Did anyone know you were Jewish? And how were you able to keep that up for so long?
No, nobody knew. Maybe the principal of the boarding school probably knew, but nobody else knew. My name was Evelyne, and my maiden name sounded French, so I never had any problem. And they did not know. And my father came to the village. He rented a little room, and every Sunday going to mass, he would say hello to me. So I didn't feel alone. Where I felt alone, it was in Switzerland. That was a very bad experience.
And you were still a child at the end of the war. Can you tell us a little bit more about your post-war childhood, what that was like?
Well, it was an adjustment for all of us to adjust to normal life or whatever. It was hard, and I had been bounced around to so many schools that it was hard for me to concentrate on my homework. The years, they were difficult, and then Michelle left. That really came here, so it was very hard for us.
So from the Witness Theater testimony, it's a pretty amazing project. Can you tell us a little bit more about that process and what it was like to work with young people in that way?
Okay, that was a wonderful experience. These young people were wonderful, and just sharing our experience to them, and then they played it out. It was just a beautiful experience. I love to do that. Yes.
It was a pretty incredible performance. And there was a lot more to that performance. There's beautiful song and music. Yes. I'll share the link for everyone as well to have an opportunity to see the whole thing. Yeah, it's an incredible program. And there's one coming up, I believe, in April this year. There's also a great program called Names Not Numbers. So these programs help bring Holocaust survivors and their testimonies to high school students, and then they create a performance or production that shares their work. It's so fabulous. So I'm so happy it exists. I'm happy you were able to be a part of it. So with everything going on in the world, particularly following October 7th, do you see any parallels between what's going on today and leading up to the Holocaust?
Well, what happened on October 7th was horrifying. And of course, it reminded us all of the dark hours, as we call it. And now nobody knows what's going to happen. It's pretty bad. It's discouraging, to say the least. And also to know that most Jewish students in American universities are not safe. And that's even worse.
Excellent point. A question that I had is similar to this next question from Amy. Does telling your story take an emotional toll on you, or is it more like unburdening, a feeling of strength? So that's Amy's question. And I was also going to ask, does it impact or change you in any way to share your testimony?
Well, it's both. I mean, it's difficult, and of course, you want to tell your story. It doesn't change me, no, but it's sometimes difficult. It became less and less difficult, but before it was really very difficult. The first, in 1991, there was the first, like a Congress or convention of hidden children at the Marriott Hotel in Times Square, and survivors came from everywhere, and it was quite an experience. But I remember going there, feeling the fear that I had felt so many years ago. I was really very nervous, but then you meet other people, and then you relax. But it was a lot difficult. Yes.
Robin asks, how old were you when you came to the US, and did you want to come? Did you want to stay back in?
I came on my 17th birthday, and I did not want to come, no. But my parents didn't ask me.
So what was that? Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
It's such a beautiful city, and I'm still in love with Paris. But I was even then. I didn't want to leave Paris, no.
And what was it like coming to the United States and trying to assimilate into this culture after being in France after the war?
Very difficult. Well, we started with a bad experience because I was born in France. My parents were born in Poland. So when you come here, you were supposed to be on a quota. My parents on a Polish quota, and I was supposed to be on the same quota as them because I was a minor. They made a mistake. The American consulate in Paris, they put me on a French quota. We arrived on this beautiful boat. Mistake, they sent us to Ellis Island for the whole weekend. So it was not a good start. Watching the Statue of Liberty behind barbed wire, it was not a good start. And wow. It was difficult the first year, very difficult.
And have you been back to France, or have you been back to the areas where you were when you were in hiding since?
Yes. I went to France many times in the last 20 years. But at one time I went to Grenoble and I went to the street where we lived. It a strange experience because everything looked small. Everything was big when I was a little girl, but everything looked small in Grenoble. But it was a difficult, yeah, it was difficult. But I did go.
And speaking about traveling to France, one of your hobbies and interests, or two of your hobbies and interests, traveling and taking photographs or photography. Can you share a little bit about how you've incorporated those two post-retirement? And if you could also share two places that you would recommend for us to see when we have a chance to travel.
Yeah, of course, as I said, I'm in love with Paris, so walking around Paris with a camera around my neck was pure heaven. The place in France that I really enjoyed was Provence, where I went a few times, and I even went with my daughter and my grandson. But for photography, the best experience is the Galapagos. That's the best photographic experience for me. It was absolutely fantastic.
My dad is shaking his hand. I think he knew that I wanted you to say that because that's where we want to go together. That's on our list.
Oh, that would be great. Yeah. That would be great. But it is a difficult trip. You walk on lava, the volcano, volcanic islands.
Maybe you'll come with us.
It was too difficult when I went. I can't again. But it's a wonderful experience, and I hope you go.
Thank you.
And I had the privilege of seeing your photography. You shared these newsletters that has a lot of your work, your photography, and also your written work. And I'm so in love with it that I shared, and I'll share it with this group, that you brought something to my attention. I also teach at a Hebrew school, modern Jewish history, and something that you shared will now be in my program with my students about the Jews in France. So
the Jews in Provence.
I'm sorry?
Provence, yes.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. There was a question for Nadine. I don't know if you feel comfortable answering, but how have you been impacted by these stories and being a 2G?
That's an interesting question. My sister's here also. I think, when you're young, you don't really understand a lot. So as my mother said, she told us a little bit. But then when we had questions, she really didn't want to talk about it when we were growing up. So that's interesting also. Then when we had the curiosity and the questions, it was too uncomfortable for her to talk about it. And I think when my mother found the hidden child group and made all these friends, then you couldn't stop my mother from talking about it. And she's been talking about it ever since. And she has this beautiful group of friends who are like family. And I think that was the best thing that happened to my mom, meeting all these people. And how it affects you is that growing up, you think you're the only one with a mom who went through this, because I never discussed it with anyone. And I have a French name, which I thought was odd growing up. Everybody had American names. Why do I have this French name? But then, when you're an adult, you appreciate, what you have, and you find out you're not the only one, but I never discussed it with other students, so it's just different. It's just, my grandparents, I always wondered why my grandmother was very, very protective of us. She was kind of nervous all the time. And then when you grow up, you understand, my mother may have been a little very overprotective. My sister would probably agree to that. But then you get it, but, and then you grow up and you find out a lot of people have shared experience. So it makes you appreciate things.
That was wonderfully said. Thank you. I don't want to put your sister on the spot, but if there's anything that you want to add, no, that's okay.
No, I think what Nadine said was right. I think it was um, you don't realize it until you're grown up, that you had a different upbringing than other people. And I think it was interesting when the Hidden Child Society had bought the second generation. I know my mother remembers that. They never did it again. But it was really interesting to talk to other children and of Holocaust survivors and understand the commonalities, and it was very helpful. And it is a different upbringing that other people have, and you just have to recognize that. And but I'm real proud of my mom for coming out and talking about everything. So
yeah. I also wanted to add, a few years ago, my mother spoke in California. So she spoke about her experience. There was all these adult, the children came. My mother was a child, of the Holocaust. And I sat in a room with second generation. And my story was different because my grandparents were part of the resistance. So a lot of trauma is passed down through generation. And a lot of people had trauma, even though they grew up here in America. And it was just, and so when I spoke about my mother's story and my grandparents' story after the class session, people came up to me and thanked me for the story because they didn't have shared stories of people that resisted. So that was very positive to a lot of stories. So my mother's story is positive because her parents were so brave. And they really put their lives on the line for others. And they hid people in their homes. And they fed people. And my Aunt Rochelle had this false bottom in her handbag. And if you look up her testimony, her name was Rochelle Fradkin. You can find it. She will tell you no one bothered her. She went all over France. She didn't look Jewish. And she saved so many people.
I once asked her, I said, aren't you afraid? You were not afraid? She said, oh, no, I was a young girl. Nobody paid attention to me. And here she was with, with this bag full of false papers and whatever. Yeah.
She was not afraid.
No.
Which is so amazing.
She was not in Lyon, but in Grenoble she was. She said in Grenoble it became very dangerous, and she was scared. Yeah. Not to go with false papers, but they had pamphlets. They wanted her to stuff mailbox with pamphlets, and that was very dangerous. And then she got scared. She stopped doing that. It was too dangerous. It was risky. They were very lucky.
I'm sorry?
They were just very lucky.
So this was so incredible having that dynamic with you three. Thank you for sharing that and having the perspective of two Gs. As a 3G, a grandchild, I also hear a lot of the differences and similarities between our generations as well as the children of survivors and the grandchildren of survivors, and how that messaging or the testimonies have been passed down to us, and even the trauma. We have that buffer where we have the parents who have had a lot of that or had to take a lot of that if they did, and how that has protected us as grandchildren. And also, I remember my grandmother sharing these stories with me when I was so young that when I was 8 years old, when we had our first publishing books in third grade, mine was about the Holocaust. Everyone was writing about the magic pencil and this and that. And I wrote about the Holocaust. And to me, that was totally normal. But I'm looking back at it today and thinking, wow, to be sharing these stories with young people. And I think, there was a lot that I was exposed to, which was important. And it was very hard, but I think I only understood as much as my brain could take. And, little by little, you start to incorporate more information. So it's pretty amazing. And I appreciate everything that survivors went through and shared, and 2Gs, what you've done. I see Rosa has her hand raised. I would love to hear from you, Rosa.
Part of the reason that I said that I appreciated, particularly when you mentioned the resistance, is because it is priceless, as you said, for all the survivors and children of survivors to have something positive, but also to fight the misinformation that there is out there, even among those who are not Jewish, who think, that Jews didn't fight back then, and then you start reading and you start listening to survivors, and you learn that in fact there was a lot of resistance. So I think the more we have of these examples, these are priceless, because it's another battle that we have to fight, this misinformation. When I read The Light of Days, I don't know if you're familiar with the book. It's a very thick tome, but it's full of examples. So there were so many instances of Jewish resistance, and it's invaluable to get them out there and to have them recorded for everyone to see and maybe to learn from, hopefully to learn from.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well said.
And Michael, you were right when you said we would all love her and appreciate your testimony as well.
Thank you, Rosa. And Marguerite, you have your hand raised, so if you'd like to share, just unmute yourself.
Yes, hi. So I'm a 2G. My father was a Holocaust survivor from France. He also gave his testimony to the Shoah program. He was from Lyon, and they escaped from Paris to Marseille, and they were able to get on a boat 24 hours before the borders were closed. Unfortunately, my aunt and my grandfather were captured in Drancy and then deported and killed in Auschwitz. But I also had my aunt Rachel, like Evelyne's, stayed in France with fake papers, and she was able to live there, and she was credited with saving the entire family because she saw ahead of what was going on. I guess my question is, with my father, he was very, very much from the time we were very little, it was urgent for him to tell us the story because he felt like it was so important that we know as children. And even though it was obviously traumatic to have heard that as a child, I think it was so important in developing her character and understanding, being able to navigate the real world. So I'm curious for your daughters, Evelyne, if you also feel that maybe this has given you kind of a broader scope on the world, and certainly with the events that are happening today.
Yes, but it was difficult. I always had to share the stories with my children. For my children, of course, they always felt different because their mother had an accent. So it's also that part that because I have an accent, I always feel that I'm maybe a little from another planet. But otherwise to come back to, and I want to also add that France was the country in Europe that had the most survivors because you had the free zone, and like your family was able to leave France from a boat in the middle of the war. And that was the reason. And other people also who had money could go into small villages and hide and blend with the scenery. And they had enough money to survive the whole war. So more Jews actually survived France than any other country because of that, of those two reasons.
I think in terms of the question about, I think one of the interesting parts of this is that for many years as I was growing up, my mother never talked about the Holocaust outside the home. It wasn't something people talked about at all. And so it was talked about within the home. So what happened was finally when Steven Spielberg started the Shoah Foundation and started taking the testimonies, that's when it started to come out. And then it was like somehow all of a sudden not okay to talk about it. So, and it really was a sea change in the way I know my mother felt and the way, and we felt. It was like you could just all of a sudden talk about it and it was more accepted. I don't know how else to say that in a better way. So, but yes, it definitely gave me a broader view of the world. I had a real intense understanding of anti-Semitism and was prepared for it more, I think, than when I went out in the world. I still, it's, you know, still exists today. It definitely made me very pro-Israel. And, you know, so it definitely gave me a more broader view of the world and at a younger age. But you also just have to understand, like, it was not a secret, but it just wasn't talked about at all.
I would say mainly I did not talk about because it was too painful. And for most of survivors, that's the reason we didn't talk about it. It was too painful. I mean, you remember how your parents were scared, and it was just some bad memories. So that was the main thing that we didn't talk about it.
But it just wasn't like even talked about. I'm just talking about people just didn't talk about it. It was like, I'm not talking about you didn't talk about it. Nobody really talked about it until it, you know, it started to, you know, come out with movies and people started, you know, Elie Wiesel wrote books about it. There were books, but there really wasn't a wide discussion about it until, you know, the late 80s and 90s.
Yeah.
Catherine shares this thought, sort of a question, that it would be wonderful to know how many people are alive today because of the folks that Rochelle gave false ID papers to. It's an incredible thing to ponder, yeah.
Well, one young girl from the school, from SAR, she had asked me, did she know what happened to the people she gave the false paper to? I said, no, she did not know them. She gave them the false paper, did whatever she had to do with them, then went away. She never found out if they made it or not. In those years, you know, you didn't know. So she does not, never found out.
But, you know, Mom, you should expand on the network. Like, there were like, where did she get the false papers from? Like, my grandfather was involved with so many people. Like, Rochelle went to near Spain, I think, to get the papers. You should elaborate on that.
Okay, this is my father had a fellow Bundist in Pau, P-A-U. It's a town in France, but not far from Spain. And there, this man had a connection with someone in the mayor's office. He was a man who had a authorized signature in the mayor's office. So this man took a batch of blank identity card. He put the good stamp of the mayor and he signed it because he was authorized. Excuse me. He was authorized, and he gave it to this man, and Rochelle went and got these identity cards, which then they could fill out, and they were genuine false papers, but they were very good false papers. The police could not recognize that they were false because they were real, except they were false. So she did a lot. Yeah, they were involved with this. False, you know, to provide false identity for people who needed it.
And there's another question from Miriam. She states that she believes that you were raised in a secular family, but you can elaborate on that if that's not the case. Did your Jewish practices change as a result of the war, or did your parents' attitude change? Then she goes on to say that many Jews turned away from their religion after their experiences, and I'll say that also the opposite did happen. Some people became closer or more connected to their Judaism. Can you tell us about your own experience with that?
We stayed secular, but when we came here, we did observe the traditions, the holidays, but we stayed secular, yes. But family reunions, you know, for all the holidays, yes. But not in Paris, never. I did not know about Jewish holidays in Paris until I came here. But here we do as the Romans do. We just celebrate all the holidays, but we stay secular. That did not change.
Michael, this is Miriam. May I just interject for a second? I don't know what people are supposed to do, and I know we're running out of, it's already after 3.
We're like family here. You can do whatever you want.
One thing. Evelyne and I know each other well. She and my mother were both survivors of the Holocaust. My mother has sadly died, but they were friends and colleagues in New York. In any event, my question to you, and just comment, one thing I haven't heard discussed much, maybe it's rare. My mother repeatedly insisted all her life on saying she was not a survivor. The reason being she had not been to a concentration camp. She was in Paris the entire war. She was young. She was an adolescent, just a few years older than Evelyne. And she certainly was a survivor. She was in Paris the whole time with the Jewish Star and the deprivations. Her father and her brother did not make it. So it was only her and her mother. But the main thing is she resolutely refused to say she wasn't a survivor. She died many, many years ago. And after her death, we started hearing about this denialism among survivors, that they just felt there were different strata, different layers. My mother felt she couldn't complain, she couldn't say anything because so many people she knew had been killed. So I thought that was an interesting wrinkle that may not be as common.
Well, I do not agree with her because we know she went through a lot and almost didn't make it. I mean, to stay in Paris during the war was incredible for the duration. And of course, she lost her brother, her father. So she went through a lot, and she's definitely was a survivor. And it's a pity that she did not recognize it, but she should have.
Thank you, Evelyne. Thank you. I know.
Really.
Yeah.
Thank you, Miriam, for sharing that, and Evelyne for your thoughts. And I've heard that a lot as well, where when this Holocaust survivor term came about, it was generally, quote unquote, reserved for Holocaust survivors who had been in concentration camps, et cetera. And I think that has become more broad, which I think is excellent, because it's all these stories and testimonies that need to be shared, and also validating people's experiences as survivors. Before we part, can you share your sister's first and last name one more time, as someone could find it and listen to her interview if they look her up, either the spelling as well?
Well, Rachel is Rachel, and Fradkin, Fradkin. And she was an amazing woman, really, with a fantastic memory. Oh my gosh.
Amazing.
Amazing.
And Evelyne, before we do part, maybe one last question, if there was anything you would like to leave us with before we end the program today.
Well, the fact that you are making this program is very, very hopeful. Give us hope, and I'm so pleased that you're doing this. And I hope young people will have a better life and not go through what we did.
Amen. I think those are beautiful last words for this program. I just want to thank you, Evelyne, for being here, for sharing your testimony, Nadine and Denise for sharing as well, and for everyone here for being a part of this today, for sharing, for bearing witness. I will be sending an email with a link to this recording. Please feel free to share it far and wide. Tell everyone about this program, and I hope to see you on April 9th for our next 2G Tuesdays program. Take care and be well, everyone.
Thank you. And thank you to all my family and friends who are here today. Thank you so much.